You probably watched Zelensky's last speech, where he made the point that it was not simply enough to force the Russians into making concessions and making a deal, but indeed it should be made sure that Russia could never do this again. I mean, this is talking about defeating Russia essentially, and now the Europeans, they more or less mimic the same logic. That is, as you said, there should be security guarantees for Ukraine because they are the victim. Russia should have none because they're the aggressor. This is how now international security seemingly works. But again, they're saying this as they're at the edge of defeat. So it is quite extraordinary to watch. But of course, in the real world, Russia's realizing that it's winning. Like to be honest, one of my concerns is that they might get too bold as they're winning and overreach. So far, that doesn't seem to be the case. If anything, the main criticism against Putin now is that he's not responding appropriately, according to many in Moscow. But Putin responded now. He made some comments about the three pigs in Europe, and he also made the comment that before New Year's, the Oreshniks, which are now in mass production, will be combat ready. They will enter service. How do you see this? Do you think they would actually start using the Oreshniks, or they're still only intended as a deterrent? Because we're not deterred. So at some point, if we treat it as a bluff, and it is a bluff, then it's not going to have a deterrent value anymore.
Yeah, my guess, let me look on or talk about the Oreshniks first, is that Russia's main incentive and rational from a military perspective objective is to build up as many of those as they can in production, to use not as a deterrent. They're not going to provide a deterrent. There is clearly nothing that Russia has or could have that will deter the West, because they already have tactical nuclear weapons, strategic nuclear weapons, a Navy, an Air Force, large ground forces. None of that has deterred us. So just adding another category of missiles on top of the several they already have with the Gonzals and the other hypersonics, etc., the glide bombs, the now expanded capable glide bombs, all that, none of that stuff is deterrent. And so this won't either. There's no question about it. So the Russians would want to make sure they have enough to actually use if they have to. And what I suspect that they'll do is to continue to go slow, because I think that they want to continue to build up to some unknown quantity of a stockpile of all of these categories of missiles that I just mentioned, most importantly the Oreshnik, and also the air defense missiles for their own S-300, S-500, etc., all the different categories that they have, so that if eventually the war does expand and it does become conventional between NATO and Russia, then they can literally swamp us with all the key aspects. You may have seen this report in the BBC 2 or 3 weeks ago, maybe it was even less than that, that if the UK, if it suddenly find itself in a conventional war, that it could sustain high-level combat operations for a few weeks. And that is symptomatic of the entire West. Whether you're talking France, Germany, the United States, you can add us into that same category. We are not on a wartime footing. We do not have the ability to sustain combat. We can launch attacks, we can launch missile strikes, we can have air defense for point targets at periods of time, but we cannot sustain it. So it appears to me that Russia is one of the reasons they're doing this go slow thing in Ukraine, which we mock them for regularly, is not because they can't go anymore, is because they don't want to go anymore, but they do want to keep the pressure on. So it looks like they're looking for that happy medium to where they want to keep significant pressure on so that the Ukraine side doesn't get a chance to catch their breath or to catch a break, but not so much that they get a breakthrough too early, because I think they want to build up all of their stockpiles in these key weapon systems so that in the event that there's action with the NATO later, then all of the time that this go slow is happening. And so let's take this 2-year period that Emmanuel Macron mocked Russia for just a couple of months back. All during that time, Russia has been building up stockpiles. The rate that they're reported to be building any category you want to look at, Kinzhals, the glide bombs, artillery shells, etc., and the Oreshniks are way more than they're using. Obviously, they've only used Oreshnik once, but all these others, the range and the Garand 2s, now add that to the list. The rate at which they're using them is way, way less than they're actually producing. Ergo, they're stockpiling them up somewhere and to some degree. Meanwhile, in the exact same period of time, our inventories are deteriorating and declining because our maximum production capacity, while improved from where it was in 2022, still is not enough to offset the actual usage. So we're declining our stockpiles. So in the event that at some point there is a conflict and a clash between NATO and Russia and Russia, they can sustain combat at a pretty high level for a long period of time. And once they get through, some of these stockpiles, then they can maintain it because they already have the higher level of production capacity. We would have to go on a crash course, and that would still take a year or two, probably more than like 2 or 3 in some categories. Even if you had an existential threat, it just takes time. So we are making ourselves weaker. They are making themselves stronger as we go through. So I think that Putin is not driven by emotions the way all of us in the West are. And I think that he will say, I'm going to just keep this going on at a sustained level here. We're going to win. In his mind, there's no possibility they can lose. In the event that anything ever goes sideways, they can say, okay, that's it. We're going to now just swamp a certain area, even tactically, and just blow through something if they want to. They've not tried that. Since they went back to the offensive following the 2023 Ukraine offensive, Russia has not tried a big operation anywhere. They've used small numbers of troops and they've kept the pressure on, but they haven't even attempted any kind of a big arrow movement, so to speak. They can, and that would come at a high cost initially. But my calculation militarily is that if they were to do that, it would not be very hard to break through at selected weak points anywhere along this 1,000+ kilometer front line. But they've chosen not to do that so far. And I project and assess that the reason is because they're building up these capabilities, continuing to weaken NATO in the process. We're self-weakening ourselves by continuing to now, as I think happened earlier today, where the European Union said, okay, we're going to send now, we've committed $90 billion to give to Ukraine just to function as a state for the next 2 years. We still don't know for sure where that money is coming from. Apparently, they haven't yet approved the stolen assets issues from Russia. But otherwise, I don't know where they're going to get it. They're going to have to borrow it from somewhere. It doesn't come out of thin air. But they're now even going to weaken their economic system, in addition to weaning themselves all the way off Russian oil, which will again increase the cost of just doing economic activity. And then they're lowering their physical stockpiles of key ammunition systems here. This is insane for us to do all of that stuff while you can see and count Russia's getting stronger and bigger in all of these categories, and they have millions more they could mobilize if they needed to. They haven't. So it's irrational what we're doing, Glenn, and yet here we are.
Yeah, I see that. Well, in terms of not being deterred, I think it's quite evident, not just the invasion of Kursk, which I think is extraordinary in its own, but Russian intelligence, they confirmed that it was the British that led the attack on Russia's nuclear deterrent, which is, again, it's hard to grasp that this is real, but we already gone to such a massive extent that, the belief that anything will deter the West now, I think is, they see this as being unlikely. But so no, it might be, as you suggest, that these weapons are intended for actual combat if the Western countries decide to join in on this war. But
And listen, I can just tell you that if it were me, if I had that capability, and who knows, I can't even speculate how many of these things they may have, but it's pretty self-evident that we don't have any air defense whatsoever against those, because we don't have it against many other categories, but we sure wouldn't have it against those Oreshniks. I mean, there's a limited number of places where we have arms and ammunition factories in the West. I'm talking about, and we have, unlike the Russians and the Ukrainians, who now disperse all of their stuff because they've learned through the pain of loss that if you have large stockpiles in any one place, it's an easy target. We haven't learned that yet. We haven't spread them out. I mean, going all the way back to the Cold War, we still have these big inventories. You could target each of those things because they're well known where they are. I mean, you could in a short period of time. I'm talking like 12 hours. You could just systematically just destroy like a large portion of our industrial capacity, of our stockpiles, of even what we have that's less. You can really damage a lot of that, because a lot of these Cold War ammunition storage facilities were designed to stop the technology that existed then. Oreshnik is apparently beyond that, and it wouldn't stop it. So a lot of these things that we think are protected probably aren't. And Russia could hit a lot of those things right off the bat that could denude you even before anything joins at all in the front line in the event of a war. And of course, if that happens, Glenn, then the possibility that somebody, whether it's UK or France, uses nuclear weapons because they see themselves losing is really high. Russia would no doubt calculate that and try not to have something to prompt a nuclear sunset, because there is 100% certainty they would retaliate in kind. That's the danger that we're in right now, and what we seem oblivious to at the leader level in the West.
And assuming the Russians would go for a bloody nose against a country like Germany, which has taken the lead and is not a nuclear power,
Yeah,
which is probably why the British and the
exactly what.
Germans are already preparing with this kind of shared security agreements. But I think you're right about this, also about the Russians building up in the rear, because there's been so many reports I've seen about all these new productions from the Russians, which are not going to the front, but they're building up in the back, everything from armored vehicles, but especially missiles.
Yes,
They're just,
yes.
pumping them out and storing it. So I just, that's a very good explanation. I'm always asked by people, why aren't Russia just, going hard, go for a decapitation strike, something like this? But that's a good explanation, or the assumption that the Europeans would try to rescue the situation somehow by entering.
And I'll tell you, Glenn, see, to me, that from the Russian side, that shows a very high risk averse mentality. Because see, I have argued, again, forget about right and wrong, forget about morality, forget about east or west, who's right or wrong. Just from a military analysis perspective, I have argued that Russia had the capacity to do this, and they could have paid that price somewhere else and brought this war to a close a lot earlier. And they would still have the risk that the West had done this. And we've already had 4 years of depletion of our stockpiles and all the other inventories we have. I'm thinking that they have a lot more to gain by bringing the conflict in Ukraine to a quicker military conclusion, but they haven't done it. They have chosen not to because they're risk averse, in my view. But they're risk averse while building more capacity, so that in the event it happens later, then they have a lot lower concerns than we would on our side. So I mean, it's all about what somebody wants to do. But on the positive side, that shows that Russia is still risk averse, even though they have a power advantage. They haven't used it yet, like we probably would have in the similar circumstances. And that's hopeful that we can reach some kind of negotiated settlement, that even in this late hour, that the Russian side is still willing, from a position of strength, to have a negotiated settlement that's ugly and distasteful, but not catastrophic for our side, if only we'll allow it to happen.
I think for our side, the main goal, I guess, would have been just for the Ukrainians and Russians to bleed each other white, and then towards the end of it, the West could kind of put its foot down and step in some way and just put an end to it. Very consistent with the offshore balancer strategy, but what we see now is very different. Though the Europeans exhausted themselves militarily, economically, also politically, as we see now with these unpopular governments. But also the United States pulling out, distancing itself. Meanwhile, the Russians are now building up this powerful arsenal, which is very clearly intended for Europe if they go to war with Russia. So it just seems as if the Russians want to make it clear that if you enter, we will come out swinging. We will make sure that we'll have powerful missiles. It's not going to be some little war in the trenches where you tip the scales
Yeah.
in favor
Well,
of Ukraine.
listen, Putin said that very thing, what, 10, 12 days ago? The exact same thing you just said there. He said, we don't want to go to a war, but if you start one, we will fight it, and we can do it today. And then he specified this whole special military operation. It's like, he goes, it's like surgical. We're using small steps here, but in a big war, we would not hold back like that. There's a lot more we could do. So he's quantified exactly what you just said.